Let me ask you something and be honest with yourself. How many times have you said yes while your body was screaming no? How many nights have you gone to bed exhausted, not because you're weak, but because you're carrying too much that was never yours to carry? Here's what most people don't realize. You're not overcommitted because you lack discipline. You're overcommitted because your brain is running a hidden survival program and it's been hijacking your decisions for years. Tonight, you're going to see that trap clearly. And the moment you see it, you'll never be controlled by it again. Take a moment and really hear this, because if you miss this part, everything else sounds like advice. And this is not advice. This is awareness. And awareness changes everything. Most people believe their overcommitment problem started with their calendar. Too many meetings, too many messages, too many people pulling at them from every direction. But that's not where this began. This started long before emails, long before phones, long before deadlines. This started thousands of years ago, deep inside the survival brain that still runs a huge part of your life today. Your brain was not designed for modern life. It was designed for survival in a dangerous, unpredictable world where belonging meant safety and rejection meant death. If you were part of the tribe, you lived. If you weren't, you didn't. So your brain learned something very fast. Fit in, be useful, don't upset people, say yes when asked. That wiring kept your ancestors alive. And that same wiring is still quietly operating every time someone asks you for more than you can give. So when you say yes to something you already know you don't have time for, that's not weakness. When you feel uncomfortable saying no, even when your body is screaming for rest, that's not lack of discipline. That is a survival response firing in a world that no longer requires it. Your brain is trying to protect you from a threat that doesn't exist anymore. Think about it. Why does a simple request feel so heavy? Why does a message make your chest tighten? Why does disappointing someone feel dangerous even when you know logically it's not? Because logic lives in the front of your brain. Survival lives deeper, faster, louder, and survival always wins unless you learn how to interrupt it. Your brain is constantly asking one question, am I safe? And for most people, safety has been unconsciously linked to approval, to being needed, to being reliable, to being the one who never lets anyone down. So when someone asks, your brain doesn't hear a neutral request. It hears a threat to belonging, and it reacts instantly with yes. Of course, I'll make it work. And then later, much later, you pay the price. You feel stretched, drained, resentful. You start asking yourself, why did I agree to this? And then comes the shame. I should be able to handle this. Other people do. But the truth is, other people are running the same program. They're just better at hiding the cost. Here's what's wild. The modern world keeps triggering this ancient wiring all day long. Notifications, deadlines, social expectations, opportunities. Your brain can't tell the difference between a life or death threat and an unanswered message. To your nervous system, it's all urgency, it's all danger. And so you stay in reaction mode, saying yes, pushing through, convincing yourself rest will come later, but later never comes. And the longer you live this way, the more normal it feels. Chronic overcommitment becomes your identity. You don't even ask if you want to do something anymore. You ask if you can survive it. And that is not freedom. That is captivity disguised as responsibility. Now listen carefully, because this is the turning point. The problem is not that your brain is broken. The problem is that it's doing exactly what it was designed to do in the wrong environment. And once you understand that, the shame dissolves. You stop attacking yourself. You stop trying to fix your personality. And instead, you start learning how to lead your nervous system. Because here's the truth, you don't need more willpower. Willpower loses against survival every time. You need awareness and interruption. You need to recognize when an ancient reflex is hijacking a modern decision, that tight feeling when you're about to say no. That's not danger, that's old wiring misfiring. That urge to explain yourself, justify yourself, overpromise, that's not kindness. That's fear dressed up as generosity. And once you see it, you can pause instead of react. That pause is everything. That pause is where evolution stops running your life and choice steps in. That pause is where you move from survival to creation. And this is why some people look so calm under pressure. It's not because they care less. It's because they've learned to separate real threats from imagined ones. They've trained their brain to understand that saying no does not equal rejection, and rejection does not equal death. You were never meant to live in constant urgency. You were never meant to be accessible at all times. You were never meant to measure your value by how much you can carry. That belief was installed for survival, not fulfillment. Once you see this trap, you can't unsee it. Every automatic yes becomes a signal. Every surge of guilt becomes information, not something to obey, something to observe. And the moment you stop letting an ancient brain make modern decisions, that's the moment your life begins to feel like yours again. Now let's go deeper, because this is where most people misunderstand themselves, and that misunderstanding quietly runs their entire life. You think you overcommit because you care too much, or because you're ambitious, or because you want to be helpful. But if we slow this down and look underneath the behavior, we find something far more powerful at work. Overcommitment is not a time problem. It's not a scheduling problem. It's an identity problem. At some point in your life, usually early, usually unconsciously, you learned that being valued meant being useful, that love, approval, or safety came from showing up, stepping up, and not letting people down. Maybe you were praised for being dependable. Maybe you were rewarded for being the strong one. Maybe chaos taught you that your role was to hold everything together. Whatever the origin, the message landed: if I am needed, I matter. And once that belief forms, your calendar becomes a mirror of your identity. So when someone asks you to take on more, it doesn't just feel like a request. It feels like a test of who you are. And saying no doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like a threat to your value, to your image, to your place. That's why even successful, driven, intelligent people struggle here, because this has nothing to do with intelligence. This is emotional conditioning. This is the brain protecting an identity it believes keeps you safe. Notice what happens inside you when you imagine disappointing someone. There's an instant emotional response: tightness, guilt, anxiety, and your mind rushes in with stories. They'll think, I don't care. They'll stop trusting me. I'll lose respect. That story is not random. It's the identity fight, for survival. And here's the truth. Most people never confront. Many of us would rather be exhausted than feel unneeded. We would rather be overwhelmed than risk being misunderstood. We would rather be busy than face the terrifying question, who am I if I stop doing everything for everyone? So overcommitment becomes proof that you matter, proof that you're important, proof that you're worthy, and the cost doesn't show up immediately, so the pattern keeps reinforcing itself. But over time, something starts to crack. You start feeling resentment toward the very people you said yes to. You feel drained doing things that once gave you pride. You begin fantasizing about escape, quitting, disappearing, starting over, not because you hate your life, but because your identity has trapped you inside it. And then comes the quiet guilt for even feeling that way. I should be grateful. Others have it worse. This is just what responsibility feels like. And so you push harder, caring more, smiling wider, while slowly disconnecting from yourself. Let me tell you something that may shake you. And if it does, that's good. Being needed is not the same as being valued. Being busy is not the same as being fulfilled. And being reliable is not the same as being alive. Your worth was never meant to be proven through exhaustion. The moment you tie your identity to overgiving, you lose your ability to choose freely, because every yes is no longer about alignment. It's about maintaining an image, and the image always demands more. This is why people with the biggest hearts often burn out the fastest, not because they care too much, but because they've confused caring with self-erasure. They believe boundaries mean selfishness. They believe rest must be earned. They believe saying no requires an explanation. But here's the reframe that changes everything. Saying no is no. A rejection of others. It is a declaration of self-respect. And self-respect is the foundation of every healthy relationship, every powerful decision, every meaningful life. When your identity shifts from I am valuable because I'm needed to I am valuable because I exist, your behavior changes effortlessly. You don't have to force boundaries. You don't have to fight guilt. The nervous system relaxes because it no longer believes love is conditional. And this doesn't make you less generous. It makes you more intentional. It doesn't make you colder. It makes you clearer. It doesn't shrink your impact. It concentrates it. The most powerful people are not the ones who say yes to everything. They're the ones who know who they are without applause, without approval, without constant validation. Their yes carries weight because it's rare. Their presence has power because it's chosen, not obligated. So ask yourself, not with judgment, but with honesty, who are you trying to be when you overcommit? The hero, the fixer, the dependable one? And who would you be if you didn't need to perform that role anymore? That question isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to free you. Because the moment your identity shifts, your behavior follows. And when your worth is no longer up for negotiation, your time stops being exploited by others and by you. You don't need to do more to deserve peace. You need to stop proving your worth through sacrifice. Now let's expose the trap that keeps this pattern alive even when you know better. Even when you promise yourself, next time I'll say no. Because knowledge alone doesn't break this cycle. Chemistry does. Every time you say yes, especially when someone thanks you, appreciates you, or looks relieved, your brain releases a small hit of dopamine. Dopamine is not the happiness chemical like people think. It's the anticipation chemical. It's a good job. You're winning, keep going signal, and your brain loves it. So when you agree to something, even something you don't want to do, your brain gets rewarded immediately. You feel useful, valued, productive, needed. There's relief too. Relief from potential conflict, relief from guilt, relief from the fear of disappointing someone. And that relief feels good. But here's the catch. Dopamine pays instantly and collects later. The stress doesn't hit right away. The exhaustion doesn't show up in the moment. The resentment doesn't appear when you're smiling and saying yes. It shows up days later, weeks later, when your energy is gone and your schedule is packed and you're wondering how your life started feeling so heavy. Your brain never connects the cost to the reward because they're separated by time. And whatever gives fast reward with delayed pain becomes addictive. That's not a character flaw. That's neuroscience. This is the same mechanism behind junk food, scrolling, gambling, and overworking. The brain gets trained to chase the short-term payoff and ignore the long-term consequence. And over time, your nervous system starts craving the hit of being needed, even as it quietly collapses under the weight of it. So you start saying yes automatically, not consciously, reflexively, before your wiser self even has a chance to speak. And when someone asks you for something, notice what happens. There's a split second where your body leans forward. Your mouth almost answers before your mind checks in. That's not politeness, that's conditioning. You've trained your brain to associate yes with safety and reward and no with discomfort and threat. So your system does exactly what it's been trained to do. But let's get brutally honest for a moment. If saying yes really made you happy, you wouldn't be burned out. If being busy really meant success, why? Wouldn't feel empty if overcommitment really worked. You wouldn't be here listening to this. The dopamine trap keeps you chasing approval while slowly draining your life force. And the more exhausted you get, the more your brain reaches for the next quick hit to feel better. Another yes, another promise, another obligation, because it doesn't know any other way to soothe itself. That's how people end up trapped in cycles they swear they want to escape. Now here's the turning point. Dopamine isn't the enemy. It's just misunderstood. The problem isn't that your brain seeks reward. The problem is what it's been rewarded for. Right now, your nervous system gets rewarded for pleasing others, for reacting fast, for being available, for saying yes, but it hasn't been trained to reward alignment, clarity, or long-term fulfillment. And that can be changed. The moment you pause before responding, just a pause, you interrupt the chemical loop. You deny the instant dopamine hit, and yes, it feels uncomfortable at first. That discomfort is withdrawal. That's your brain saying, hey, where's my reward? But stay there, breathe, because something powerful happens next. When you choose a response based on values instead of reflex, your brain begins learning a new reward system, one where peace feels better than approval, one where clarity feels better than chaos, one where energy becomes more valuable than praise. At first, the reward is subtle, a sense of relief, space in your body, quiet confidence. But over time, that reward compounds and the old hits stop controlling you. This is how you retrain the brain, not with force, with consistency, with awareness, with patience. You don't break free by trying harder. You break free by choosing slower. You don't win by adding more. You win by subtracting what drains you. And when you stop feeding the dopamine trap, something incredible happens. You start feeling present again, alive again, powerful again, not because your life got easier, but because your brain finally stopped running the show without your permission. Because the moment you stop chasing the short-term hit, you reclaim the long-term life. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable for a lot of people, because this is the place where the mind gets clever. This is where overcommitment puts on a disguise and calls itself productivity. Most people believe they're busy because life demands it, because responsibilities are real, because opportunities are rare, because success requires sacrifice. And yes, responsibility matters. Yes, effort matters. But let's be honest, there's a difference between purposeful action and constant motion. And most people never stop long enough to feel the difference. Busyness feels productive. It feels safe. It feels responsible. But very often, it's a way to avoid something deeper. Because when you're busy, you don't have to slow down. And when you don't slow down, you don't have to feel. You don't have to question. You don't have to decide who you really are or what actually matters most. You just keep moving, task to task, commitment to commitment, obligation to obligation. And movement feels like progress, even when it's not. Ask yourself this honestly. How often do you fill your schedule, not because it's aligned, but because stillness feels uncomfortable, because empty space invites questions you've been avoiding. Questions like, is this really the life I want? Or if I stop proving myself, who would I be? Or what am I afraid to face if everything got quiet? Busyness answers those questions for you. It says, don't think, don't feel, just do. And society rewards it. People praise hustle, applaud exhaustion, celebrate being booked, packed, slammed. No one questions it. So it becomes easy to confuse motion with meaning, activity with achievement, noise with importance. But look closer. The busiest people are often the least clear. The most overwhelmed are often the most unaligned. And the most exhausted are often the ones avoiding a single honest decision. Because clarity requires courage. It requires choosing one path and letting others go. It requires risking judgment. It requires saying, this matters more than that. And the brain hates that level of responsibility. So it keeps you busy instead. When you're overcommitted, you can blame time. You can blame people. You can blame circumstances. But when you slow down and choose intentionally, there's no one else to blame. And that's terrifying for the ego. So the mind says, let's stay busy. Let's stay useful. Let's stay needed. Not because it's best, but because it's familiar. Here's the truth most people never admit. Busyness can be emotional anesthetic. It numbs doubt. It numbs fear. It numbs the quiet awareness that something in your life is out of alignment. And the cost? You end up living reactively instead of deliberately. You end up checking boxes instead of building a life. You end up exhausted, not because you're doing too much, but because you're doing too little of what actually matters. Real work isn't always loud. Real work isn't always urgent. Real work often requires space, thinking, reflection, stillness, and stillness feels unsafe to a brain addicted to motion. That's why some people sabotage their own breakthroughs. They get close to clarity and suddenly they add more to their plate, more projects, more commitments, more noise, because clarity demands change and change demands letting go. But hear this clearly, the life you want is not hiding in your busyness, it's hiding underneath it. The moment you slow down enough to feel the discomfort instead of running from it, something powerful happens. You stop reacting, you start choosing, you stop filling space, you start creating direction. And this is where overcommitment begins to lose its grip. Not when you manage time better, but when you stop using busyness as a shield against your own truth. Because the moment you stop running from stillness, you finally hear what your life has been trying to tell you all along. Now, this is where the shift actually begins, because everything up to this point has been about understanding the trap. This part is about stepping out of it. And it doesn't start with a big dramatic move. It starts with something so small, most people overlook it, but it changes everything. It starts with a pause. Most of your life has been lived on autopilot, not because you're careless, but because SPE, Ed, has been rewarded. Respond quickly, decide fast, be efficient, be available. And over time, your brain learned that immediate response equals safety. So when a request comes in, your system fires before you even realize what's happening. Your mouth answers while your body tightens. Your calendar fills while your intuition stays silent. That's not choice. That's reaction. And reaction is the opposite of freedom. The pause is the space where reaction ends and power begins. It's the moment you stop letting the survival brain make decisions for the future you. It's the breath between stimulus and response where your higher mind finally gets a seat at the table. At first, the pause feels uncomfortable, almost wrong. You might feel rude, slow, uncertain. Your brain might panic and say, just answer, just agree, don't make this awkward. That discomfort is not a signal that you're doing something wrong. It's a signal that you're interrupting an old pattern. Think about it. Your nervous system has been trained for years, maybe decades, to respond instantly. So when you don't, it reacts like something is broken. But nothing is broken. You're just no longer obeying. Reflex. And in that pause, something extraordinary happens. You can finally ask a question most people never ask themselves. Do I actually want this? Not can I handle it? Not will they be upset, but is this aligned with who I want to be and where I want to go? That single question changes the quality of your life, because before the pause, every request feels urgent. Everything feels equal. Everything feels like it must be handled now. But after the pause, priorities emerge, values speak, and suddenly you realize that not everything deserves your yes. Here's what most people don't realize. Your power has never been taken from you. You've just been giving it away too fast. The pause is how you take it back. And this doesn't mean you become cold or selfish or unresponsive. It means you become intentional. It means your yes becomes meaningful instead of automatic. It means your no becomes clean instead of guilty. You don't need a long explanation. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need permission to consider your own life. The pause itself is permission. And here's the deeper truth. The pause doesn't just protect your time. It retrains your brain. Every time you pause, instead of reacting, you weaken the old survival loop. You show your nervous system that nothing bad happens when you slow down, that rejection doesn't follow, that danger doesn't arrive, that the world doesn't collapse because you took a breath. And slowly, very slowly at first, your system begins to relax. You start noticing things you missed before, your body signals, your energy levels, your excitement, your resistance. You begin to feel the difference between obligation and alignment, between pressure and purpose. This is where clarity lives, not in chaos, but in space. The pause doesn't require courage forever, only at the beginning, because once your brain learns that pausing leads to better outcomes, less stress, more energy, deeper satisfaction, it starts working with you instead of against you. And this is how people change without burning bridges, without dramatic ultimatums, without blowing up their lives. They simply stop answering life at the speed of fear. They respond at the speed of truth. And truth has a different rhythm. It's calmer, slower, more grounded. It doesn't shout. It waits. So the next time someone asks something of you, don't rush to decide, don't rush to please, don't rush to prove anything. Take the pause, feel your body, listen to what's real, because the moment you create space between request and response, you take back control of your L. Now we arrive at the moment everything comes together, because this is where freedom stops being a concept and becomes a way of living. Up to now, your life may have been defined by reaction, by other people's needs, by opportunities that looked good on the outside, but quietly drained you on the inside. And the reason it's been so exhausting is simple. You've been saying yes to too many things that weren't connected to a deeper why. Here's the truth most people never hear. The goal is not to say no more. The goal is to say yes better. Because saying no for the sake of saying no just creates another kind of resistance. But saying yes to purpose, that creates power. When you live without a clear sense of purpose, every request feels equally important. Every opportunity feels urgent. Every expectation feels heavy. And so you spread yourself thin, trying to keep up with everything, while slowly losing connection with the one thing that actually matters: direction. Purpose changes the game completely. Purpose acts like a filter. Instead of asking, can I do this? You begin asking, should I do this? Instead of measuring your life by how much you can handle, you measure it by how aligned you feel. And suddenly decisions that once felt painful become simple, not easy, but simple. When your yes is connected to purpose, it energizes you, even when it's hard, even when it demands effort. You feel alive inside it. But when your yes is disconnected from purpose, it drains you, no matter how impressive it looks, no matter how much praise it brings. That's how you know the difference. Purpose isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing what deserves your energy right now. It's about choosing the few things that move your life forward instead of reacting to the many things that pull you sideways. And here's the most important part. Purpose is not found. Most people wait. They wait for clarity. They wait for confidence. They wait for certainty. But clarity comes after commitment, not before it. You choose what matters, and your nervous system organizes around that choice. When you say yes to purpose, you're not just managing time, you're protecting energy. You're protecting focus. You're protecting the future version of yourself who has to live with today's decisions. This is why boundaries stop feeling like rejection and start feeling like alignment. You're no longer saying no because you're afraid or overwhelmed. You're saying no because your yes is already spoken for your health, your mission, your growth, your family, your craft, your life. And something fascinating happens when you live this way. People don't respect you less. They respect you more because your presence has weight. Your commitments mean something. You're no longer everywhere. You're somewhere. That's where impact lives. High performers don't do more. They do what matters. They don't protect their time because they're selfish. They protect it because they're clear. And clarity is magnetic. You were never meant to be available to everyone. You were meant to be devoted to something meaningful. And yes, choosing purpose means disappointing some people. That's unavoidable. But the deeper disappointment, the one that corrodes your soul, is disappointing yourself over and over again by living out of alignment. You don't get your life back by doing less. You get it back by choosing what deserves your full yes. When you live this way, commitment stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like devotion. You're no longer scattered, you're centered. You're no longer exhausted by obligation. You're fueled by intention. And that's the real freedom. Because the moment your yes is guided by purpose instead of pressure, your life finally moves in the direction it was always meant to go.